What's going on? It's the real Jonathan Smith Show here on Indies Sports Tickets. It's like, what? It's only 10 a.m. I know. This is officially the new start time for the real Jonathan Smith Show, coming at you every day from 10 to noon and then staying on the air partially to help out the great Dan Dockich from noon to 3. I know he has thoughts. I have thoughts on the Pacers getting swept because that's what happened yesterday. The Pacers got swept by the Boston Celtics, and it's a little frustrating because I think there's a real world where the Pacers could be up 3-1, right? There's a world where they, inbound the ball properly in game 1 and they win. There's a world where in game 3 they close the game and they win. And last night, once again, they failed to close the game in final minutes. Okay, that's ultimately what I think defined this series, right? Like the first 3 quarters of every game, the Pacers played the Celtics incredibly well, right? I saw a stat last night after the game was over. In the first 3 quarters of every game, the Celtics outscored the Pacers by 2 points. That's it. That was the point differential for the first 3 quarters of every game throughout this series. The point differential in the final 3 minutes in overtime of this series, the Celtics outscored the Pacers by 25 points. The Pacers were simply out-executed by the Celtics in the final minutes of these games. The difference was experience. Everyone gets better at everything that they do with experience, and that's ultimately why the Celtics won this series. The more experienced team won the game. Okay, whenever you're new to something, you're going to make mistakes. Okay, every Pacer, except for Pascal Siakam, was new to the conference finals. A lot of these guys that were playing for the Pacers were new to the playoffs in general. And because of that, we saw them make mistakes down the stretch. When games were close, they turned the ball over. They missed shots that they usually make. They had a chance to grab the game by the balls and force a game 5 last night, and they didn't because newness leads to mistakes. When you're new at something or when something is new to you, you just tend to struggle a little bit more. Okay, like think back, to whatever you do for a living. The first week you were on the job, it was rough, right? Like you had to learn a lot of new things. And then, maybe you got promoted. And then when you were promoted and you had more responsibility, there was newness and you probably made a couple mistakes because things were new to you. Last night, I went back because I knew I wanted to share this story. I went back and I listened to the first radio show that I ever did. I listened to it while I was prepping and gathering all my thoughts for the show today, which is going from 10 to noon, in case you didn't know. And I was listening to it, and it was terrible. It was horrendous. It was one of the worst things I've ever heard. I'm surprised that my ears weren't bleeding, right? But like I said, I knew that I wanted to tell this story, so I made myself listen to it anyway. So going into college, I wanted to major in biology or something writing focused. Okay. And so as I was kind of bouncing back and forth between the two things, my advisor was having me take different media classes and different science classes, trying to help me to decide, right? So I was playing baseball as well. So going into the spring semester, I met with my advisor, Mrs. Hooten. She was great. She tells me to take this radio class in the spring, right? Not because she thought I'd be good at radio, not because radio was really on my radar, but she was just like, look, like it's an easy A. And if you end up not pursuing something in like the writing world, this can just be written off as like some sort of elective, right? So it still counts towards you graduating. So I was like, okay, this makes sense. So fast forward, I go to my first day of this radio class and I sat in the back with one of my good buddies and we cut up, didn't pay any attention because I was told that this class was an easy A, right? Like that's why I was in there. So my professor, Professor Glover, fantastic professor, just a great dude. He's running through, like this is how the board works and this is how the radio station works. And I'm not paying any attention. And at the end of the class, I hear my professor say that your entire grade for the semester is dependent upon your ability to host an hour-long radio show once a week. I was like, oh, that's great. I don't know how to do any of this, right? So he passes out this piece of paper. We sign up for a time and a day and all that kind of stuff. So I signed up for my time. I had to start that week, right? So my first show, I show up early because I didn't know how to do anything. And so I'm in there. I'm just kind of toying with the system, trying to figure out how everything works. And basically, I figure out how to stop the music. That was the only thing that I could figure out. So I stopped the music and I talked for an hour straight. I didn't know how to put in commercials, PSAs, anything. I talked for an hour straight. And you go back and you listen to it. I talk about Aaron Rodgers for like 45 minutes. Huge mistake. Okay. Like, terror. Like, that's an awful mistake. I'm in Southwest Arkansas. There wasn't a Packers fan within 1,000 miles of where I was. I wasn't good. I didn't know what I was doing, but I did get better the more that I did it. Right. And because the more that you do something, the more that you experience something, you just get better at it. That's just kind of the way that things work. And, I'm extremely blessed to be here in a city like Indianapolis doing radio. Like, there aren't very many 24-year-olds who get to host a 2-hour long radio show in a top 40 market. Right. So, like, if I was as green now as I was back then I would be doing this. But here's the thing, though. I've gotten better. And even though I've gotten better, like, I still make mistakes, right? Like, I've been doing this for 6 years. And now that I'm doing radio in a large market for the first time, I make mistakes every single day because I just haven't done radio on this level before. And that is what we saw from the Pacers last night, right? Like, those guys have played basketball for forever. A lot of those guys are around my age, right? So they've been in the league for, 3, 4, 5, maybe even 6 years. And, like, even though they've played a lot of basketball, they never played basketball at that level before, right? They've never been on that stage. And players throughout the history of the NBA, when they get to the conference finals for the first time or the NBA finals for the first time, they often fall short. That's what the history of the league tells us. Okay, like, we saw Tyrese Halliburton struggle for stretches throughout the playoffs because he never played in the playoffs before. Anthony Edwards, the golden child of the NBA right now, has struggled in the Western Conference Finals, and he struggled in Game 7 of the second round. Why? Because he'd never been there before. He never played in a Game 7, in that Game 7 against the Nuggets. That's part of why he shot 6 of 24 from the field. Okay, he's never played in the Western Conference Finals before. That's why he's looked terrible in these first 3 games against the Mavs in part. Okay, the only player, when we look at the Pacers, that was truly consistent game in and game out was Pascal Siakam. You know why? Because he'd played in an Eastern Conference Finals before. He'd been there, right? The playoffs are an entirely different game from the regular season, and players have to adjust, and they have to get used to that before they win. When we look through the history of the NBA, this is evident. Michael Jordan didn't win his first title until he was 27 years old, and he lost in the Eastern Conference Finals twice to the Pistons before he eventually won one. LeBron James was 27 when he won his first title. All right, and he'd lost in the Eastern Conference Finals once. He lost in the finals, I think, twice before he eventually broke through in Miami. Every player, every team has to go through this. You have to earn these playoff scars for some reason, and it's hard to win deep in the playoffs until you do that. And I think that's what we're seeing this year, not only from the Pacers, but also from the Timberwolves, who are potentially also going to get swept tonight. That's just the way that it works, right? The Pacers didn't have any playoff scars before this year, and they have several from this Boston series alone between Game 1, Game 3, and then last night, right? So the Pacers come in very green. Most of them never even played in the playoffs before, and they get swept by the Celtics, a team that has a lot of playoff scars. They have a ton of them. And the Boston Celtics have been to the Eastern Conference Finals 6 times in the last 8 years. Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown have been in the Eastern Conference Finals 6 times in the last 8 years. And they don't have any jewelry to show for it. You know why that is? Because you have to earn your scars. Okay? The Timberwolves, like I said, they're probably going to get swept tonight by the Dallas Mavericks. Their series, it's been really similar to the Pacers and the Celtics. The Mavs have out-executed the Timberwolves down the stretch, just like the Celtics have done to the Pacers. Guess what? The Timberwolves, outside of Mike Conley, don't have any playoff scars. The Mavs and Luka Doncic do. Okay, they lost in the Western Conference Finals 2 years ago. Okay, and this is why experience matters. It's a pattern that we've seen happen in sports throughout the entire time that sports have been around. When two teams are both talented, usually the more experienced team wins. And that is what we saw in this series. Okay, late in games, the team that had been there before, the Boston Celtics, they executed. And the Indiana Pacers didn't. And Rick Carlisle, he was asked about this last night after the game. Here's Pacers head coach Rick Carlisle on why they couldn't execute down the stretch.
I look at the process and the level of fight, our situation with personnel, all that kind of stuff. I mean, there's no excuses. I mean, these guys, Boston has a great team. They led the league from wire to wire and really ran away with it. And look, they're opportunistic. They don't want this thing to go on any longer. Give them credit for the stuff they pulled off at the end of the last two games. They simply made more plays. They blocked shots. They got offensive rebounds. They made key shots. We were unable. I love the fact that, our guys never wavered competitively one inch or millimeter or anything like that. We played at a great level, and we made our share of mistakes like tonight. We gambled probably 5 times in the second half that led to at least 10 points for them. And those are discipline type things that you have to learn in this kind of environment. You swing and miss and they get a 3, you swing and miss, they get a layup. And it's just, and then if you're unable to match at the other end, I mean, it makes it very, very difficult, and then momentum shifts. And so, those are some of the lessons. Those are like, strategic things and discipline and stuff like that. So
that was Pacers head coach Rick Carlisle on why they couldn't close out games late down the stretch. The Boston Celtics simply made more plays. The team that had been there before made more plays. And here's the other thing. The Celtics are just better than the Indiana Pacers. They just are. The better team won. The Celtics are much more talented than the Pacers. Okay, the Celtics had the 2 best players in the series. Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown were the 2 best players in the series. Okay, Halliburton is going to continue to develop and get better, but he's not better than Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown right now. And that's okay. That's all right. Pascal Siakam was great in this series. He was a really tough matchup for the Celtics, but he's not better than Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown. And oftentimes, the team that wins the series is the team with the best player. Okay, the biggest advantage the Pacers had in this series was their bench. McConnell, Obi Toppin, and Ben Shepherd all had impacts on this series. Okay, the depth of the Pacers is a large reason why they competed in 3 out of these 4 games, and then they're a large reason as to why the Pacers made a deep run. But here's the thing. The playoffs aren't about depth. The playoffs are about asking 2 questions, okay? Like if you're sitting down and you're like, I don't know who to bet on to win this series, ask yourself these 2 questions. Who has the best player in the series, and who has the best top 5? Okay, another reason why the Celtics won this series is because the 5 best players for the Celtics, the 5 players that the Celtics had on the floor to close games, were better than the Pacers' 5 guys that they put out on the floor to close games. Okay, the Celtics had the 2 best players in the series, and the Celtics had the better 5 late in the games. Okay, like they should have won this series. They were simply the better team in the 2 most important areas. The teams that have the 2 best players in the series and a better 5 aren't going to lose many games. That's why the Celtics have lost 20 games all year, regular season and playoffs included. Okay? Teams that have the 2 best players in the series and the better 5 aren't going to lose many games, and they definitely aren't going to lose very many 7-game series. That is what makes a Mavericks and Boston Celtics NBA Finals series so intriguing. Okay, like I'm very excited to see how that series looks because the Mavs have the best player in the series, or they're going to, in Luka Doncic. But when the Mavs put their best 5 out on the floor late in games, and the Celtics put their best 5 out on the floor late in games, the Celtics' best 5, top to bottom, is better than Dallas's. But the truth of it is Luka Doncic is going to be the best player in that series, and that is what we saw throughout this series. Okay, the Celtics had the 2 best players in the series, and their closing 5 was just better than Indy's. Depth is great. TJ McConnell, Obi Toppin, Ben Shepherd. If you've been listening to the show since I started being on the air here, I've sung all three of those guys' praises. Okay. Like I own a lot of stock in Ben Shepherd. I've bought more stock in Obi Toppin. And I think everybody loves McConnell now, right? Because he's this feisty, tough, competitive dude. And like you need guys like that, right? Like the Pacers don't make it to this point without them. But when you get deep in the playoffs, it is very helpful to have the best player in the series. And the Celtics had the two best, and that's why they won the series ultimately. They were just simply the better basketball team. This isn't all in vain, though. I think we learned a lot about this Pacers team throughout this run. We learned a lot about Andrew Nembhard and just how good of a player he is in these last two games. Rick Carlisle, I think, made some great points about Nembhard and his emergence in this series. I'm going to play that audio for you when we come back here in about 3 minutes. What's going on? It's the Real Jonathan Smith Show here on Indies Sports Ticket. New time, 10 to noon every day. I hope you had a good Memorial Day weekend. Congrats to Joseph Newgarden, winner, back-to-back winner of the Indy 500. Dan gave out drivers on Friday. Looking forward to having friend of the program, Otter Creek, in the building to co-host with us here at some point. I don't know when that's happening, but definitely looking forward to that. I was talking before the break about the Pacers and how the Celtics are just a better team. They are. And that's okay. Like the Celtics have been arguably the best team in the league from start to finish. They've lost 20 games, playoffs and regular season combined. That puts them in elite company. Like teams don't really do that, especially nowadays with, all the load management stuff that happens. But despite the Pacers getting swept, we learned a lot about this team. They're resilient. They responded to every punch that was thrown at them throughout the series, whether that was them getting blown out in game 5 by the Knicks and then coming back and winning games 6 and 7, whether that was, a team going on a 12-0 run and the Pacers responding with an 8-0 run of their own. Like, this is a team that has consistently responded well to adversity throughout the playoffs, which is something that can't be coached. Like, this is a really tough group of guys. Like, they're tough, they're gritty, they play hard, they're competitive, and they're really fun to watch. We also learned that they need to get better on defense. I know that people have given Rick Carlisle a hard time throughout this series, and I'm really throughout the playoffs in general. And part of it is deserved because I don't think that Carlisle is a great in-game coach. I think game to game, when he has time to sit down, watch the tape, see what happened, I think his game plans going into games have been pretty good for the most part. But when the other team adjusts during the game, Carlisle can kind of struggle to counter. I think that weakness was kind of exposed during this playoff run. But for the most part, I thought he did a good job. When it comes to coaching defense, it's hard to put together a good defense when you just don't have the personnel for it. And the Pacers just don't have the personnel right now to be a great defensive team. They don't. It's not in the cards for them. Okay, like their best defender is Aaron Nesmith. He's good. Wouldn't say he's great. Thought he did a good job on Jason Tatum throughout the series. But after that, there's a pretty steep drop-off. Like, you can make a legitimate argument that TJ McConnell is their second best defender, and he's 6'2" and only plays 20 minutes a night. Like, that's an issue. Right? Hopefully, Jarris Walker develops when Benedict Mathurin comes back. That'll help them as well, just because of the size and the length that he brings to the floor. So we learned that, right? This team's resilient. This team is tough. But we also learned that they need to prove defensively. The other thing we learned that is a real positive is we learned that Andrew Nembhard can absolutely ball. Like, that dude can hoop. Okay, and these last 2 games are all the evidence that we need of that. Okay, like every time the Pacers needed a big shot, he made the shot. He got a little over-eager late in games, right? In game 3, he has the turnover against Drew Holiday. Drew Holiday just made a great play there. I thought he should have slowed it up. I was disappointed in the other Pacers. Like, he gets the ball. There's 3 other guys in front of him, and he pushes the pace because that's what the Pacers have done all year long. They've pushed the pace, and the other guys didn't run with him. And he looked up, and it was 1-on-4, and he tried to make a play, and Drew Holiday just with an outstanding steal. It was just a really impressive defensive play more than anything. But he got a little overzealous there. He tried to do a little bit too much, which is understandable. It's his second year in the league. We saw it again last night with about a minute left to go, game tied. He's pushing the pace, and he turned it over again. When it's like 1-on-3, like, he's got to realize what his teammates are doing, right? Even if they aren't doing what they should be doing, because when the point guard gets the ball for the Pacers and they run, like, that's what they do. Like, all the other guys that were on the floor with Nembhard should have ran with him, but they didn't. And so he's just got to be a little more aware of that. But for the most part, I thought he played great. Okay, Halliburton goes out. It feels like the Pacers are dead to rights. And in large part because of Andrew Nembhard and the way that he elevated his game, they were able to compete in games 3 and 4. Okay, they were. And honestly, games 3 and 4 reminded me a lot of Jalen Brunson's final year in Dallas, going back 2 years, right? The Mavericks, they end up in the playoffs as like a 4 or 5 seed. They're playing the Jazz. Luka's, I think he had like a bum ankle or something. He's not really playing. And Jalen Brunson was the man for the Mavericks in that series. Okay, like, their best player was out. Brunson stepped up and was awesome, right? Like, he made shots. He was the number 1 option. He was reliable. They won a game on the road in Utah without Luka because Jalen Brunson was good, right? And that was kind of a prerequisite to what we're seeing him do in New York now. That's what I think we saw from Andrew Nembhard. The best player goes out. He steps up, and he proves that he's very capable of shouldering an offensive load. And it was really impressive. I was surprised, but of course, Pacers head coach Rick Carlisle was not surprised. He highlighted just how good Nembhard was in these two games. He was asked last night after the loss if these two games were kind of like a coming out party, a bit of an emergence for Andrew Nembhard. Here's Pacers head coach Rick Carlisle on his response to that question.
And Nembhard's done this before. When Tyrese is out of the lineup, he just understands that he needs to carry more of a load. There's been a lot of talk about him really throughout the playoffs. He had a great series against New York and Milwaukee as well. And not only that, he's defending at a high level. So you're seeing a young player that's tough-minded, resourceful, and highly competitive. That is fearless, and that is, has embraced these challenges. And so it's not any accident that Team Canada has been trying to get him on board for the last 2 summers.
That was Pacers head coach Rick Carlisle on Andrew Nembhard, and just the way that he's performed, not only in games 3 and 4, but just throughout the playoffs in general. He was really good against Milwaukee. Felt like he didn't miss against the Bucks. Okay, then again, he didn't take as many shots, so it wasn't at the forefront of the conversation, but he's consistently made shots throughout the playoffs. He struggled a little bit defensively against the Knicks. That was definitely highlighted by me and several other people, but he's been good. I think this is a really good sign for the Pacers, right? It's nice knowing that they have a second creator in the offense for when Halliburton gets hurt or when Halliburton doesn't have it going, right? Like, he's a very important piece to this Indiana Pacers puzzle going forward. I've talked about this before. Part of why the Pacers were so good this year, and a large part of why they were able to go on this run, is they have found value late in the draft. Andrew Nembhard was a second-round pick. Ben Shepherd, who played not big minutes, but he played, 15 to 20 minutes a night in the Eastern Conference Finals. He was a second-round draft pick. Like, if the Pacers don't have those two guys, they don't go on this run. So, got to tip the cap to Kevin Pritchard and his ability to find good players late in the draft, because that's a hard thing to do. That is a thing that can expedite a rebuild like it did for the Pacers, right? They go from a team that didn't make the playoffs, for a decade, to being a team that makes the Eastern Conference Finals. And a large part of that is because they found talent late in the draft. When we look at the Colts, wouldn't it be really nice if they could find some talent late in the draft? That would really expedite things. When we look at the 49ers, finding late round talent can also help cover up mistakes, right? The 49ers trade 3 first-round picks so that they can draft Trey Lance. And Trey Lance is a bust. Okay, he's the backup quarterback in Dallas now. And the following year, after they trade up to draft Trey Lance, they draft Brock Purdy in the 7th round, final pick. And he's helped kind of cover up that mistake that front office made. Being able to find talent late in the draft, it's a huge advantage. I know that's kind of an obvious thing, but when I look at this Pacers team and I look at the run, like, that is the thing that really speaks volumes. And, yes, Halliburton was great. Halliburton's really emerged this year, 3rd-team All-NBA. He's going to get a nice fat paycheck because of that. They make the trade for Pascal Siakam, who was great throughout the playoffs as a whole, minus games 1 and 2 against the Knicks. Like, this team is headed in the right direction. This team is very much ahead of schedule. Like, coming into the season, people weren't talking about the Pacers making an Eastern Conference Finals run. We were talking about they'll make the play-in game. Maybe they get the 7 or the 8 seed, and then they get swept. That's kind of what we thought was going to happen before the season started, right? Like, that over-under win total was set at 34.5, and you look up, and it's like, this team's in the Eastern Conference Finals. What in the world? It's really impressive, just what they've done, and Andrew Nembhard was a large part of that success. Yesterday was Memorial Day, where we honor, fallen soldiers and things, and just a day that means a lot to me. A lot of people in my family have served. My older brother served for 6 years. Both of my grandparents did. I mean, just like, there's a decent amount of people in my family who have served in the military. I lived not that far from an Air Force base when I was in high school, and so just I've had a lot of interactions with military people and things of that nature. And so I was enjoying it yesterday. I was at my in-laws' house, grilled out, ate burgers, did all those things, and I'm sitting there, I'm hanging out. I get the notification on my phone that Bill Walton has passed. And I think that when a lot of 24-year-olds see this, their reaction probably isn't super severe. It's like, oh, this guy that is kind of wacky that I heard call Pac-12 games, he died, whatever. That was not my reaction. So when I meet someone new and they want to talk about hoops, I find a way to ask them. I figure out a way, if I can, to ask them about two basketball players. I want to know their opinion on Moses Malone and Bill Walton. Their response on how they view those two players tells me everything that I need to know about their basketball knowledge, tells me whether or not they're casual, tells me if they're a basketball historian, tells me if they're just an NBA head, kind of like I am, tells me everything that I really need to know, tells me whether or not I should really value their opinion. And obviously I bring that up because Bill Walton died yesterday. I got a full disclosure, couldn't stand Bill Walton as an announcer. He drove me crazy because he never talked about the game. And as a broadcaster, he was the definition of someone that people either absolutely loved or hated in terms of when he called basketball games, because as a person, I haven't heard anyone say anything negative about him. It's pretty evident that he was a genuinely good guy, right? In a world where, a lot of people aren't genuinely good people, right? It seems like, Bill Walton was kind to everyone that he met. Scrolling through my timeline these past, today and yesterday, it's just littered with all these Bill Walton stories. And, you tap on the profile and it's like, oh, this reporter from the middle of nowhere in Wyoming ran into Bill Walton and Bill Walton talked to him for an hour, right? Like he just seems like he was a genuinely good person, right? And he was a great basketball player too, right? Like I could sit here and I could hate on him as a broadcaster, or I could just wax poetic about him as a basketball player because he was a great basketball player. Like part of why I ask people that I'm talking to that I don't really know about basketball with for the first time about Bill Walton is because he was an incredible basketball player. Okay, if it wasn't for some foot injuries early on in his career, like he probably wins more championships. He was a two-time NBA champion. He won a finals MVP. The following year, he was the MVP of the league. You can make a legitimate argument. I believe that was the 1978 season, if I remember properly. You can make an argument. He was the best basketball player in the world for that year, right? And that's when Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was doing his thing. That's when Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was at his peak powers, right? And so he was incredible. Two-time NBA champion, right? He's an all-time great. That's why the NBA put him on that NBA top 75 list. And because he was an incredible basketball player. He was one of the guys who could 1,000% play in today's game because of his ability to pass the basketball. Like I remember being a kid and watching old Celtics and Trailblazers games, right? Like, on NBA TV growing up, they would put these NBA hardwood classics on during the offseason. And I would watch, right? Like, oh, there's a hardwood classic on. Let me watch, the finals, between the Trailblazers and who'd they play that year? Boston, probably. That'd be my guess. Like, let me watch that. Let me watch Bill Walton and see how good of a player he was. Like, a lot of people my age, around, in their early 20s or even their late 20s, like their first experience with Bill Walton with him was as the broadcaster. My first experience with Bill Walton was with him as the player, right? And he was a great basketball player. And I think the most admirable part about Bill Walton is that when you listen to people talk about him, today or yesterday, no one talked about his basketball talent, even though you 1,000% could, because he's one of the best players to ever pick up a basketball. Nobody talked about it. Instead, people mostly talked about how nice of a person he was. And when we look at, different athletes and coaches, when they pass away, like that's not usually what happens. Like when people pass away that played sports, that won a lot and were great, they don't talk about how good of a person they were. They talk about how many championships they won and Like you hear people tell stories about how, I remember being, 12 years old and I saw this guy win his first championship and he was my favorite player because of that. That's not what happened with Bill Walton. Everybody had some personal Bill Walton story of how he just treated them nicely. And it's not surprising at all, just given his personality, which really came out when he was on the air broadcasting. But, I think it's rare that we get to see these athletes that are just genuinely nice people off the floor and are awesome athletes when they're on the floor as well. I know Rick Carlisle had, a story yesterday where he talks about, Bill Walton getting him tickets and just all just these great stories. And it's amazing and it's impressive and not at all surprising. So rest in peace to Bill Walton. I wanted to do something on just like my favorite things that Bill Walton said, but there are just so many things that are so far out there. I couldn't just make a list of like, I like when he said this, this was funny, this was absurd. So Bill Walton, love him, rest in peace. Yeah. So Bill Walton, man, just pretty incredible. He was the number one overall pick. He was he was named the National Player of the Year 3 times during his time at UCLA, which is a big deal because when he played college basketball, everybody stayed for 4 years, right? And so that's part of why I think his game translated so well to the NBA was because he played well against all these NBA dudes when they were all in college, right? Like he was clearly the best college basketball player when he was playing at UCLA for John Wooden. And, he was a large part of why John Wooden won another national championship. And Bill Walton's, he winds up being the number one overall pick. And he was really good because of it. And there were expectations in Portland when he showed up, just like how there are expectations here in Indianapolis and across the WNBA in general for Caitlin Clark. And Caitlin Clark and the Indiana Fever finally grabbed their first win of the season way back on Friday. I keep forgetting that today's Tuesday. I keep thinking that today's Monday, but it's not. It's Tuesday. And the Fever, they grabbed their first win of the season on Friday. I'm going to talk a little bit about that when we come back here in about 4 minutes. What's going on? The Real Jonathan Smith Show here on Indies Sports Ticket. Closing out the first hour of a now 2-hour-long show. That's right. Every day from 10 to noon. The Real Jonathan Smith Show live on the air. I've got Matt Murphy joining me in the next segment. I've been meaning to tease that throughout the show, and I haven't done a very good job of it. Look at that. Newness leading to mistakes. That's okay. It happens sometimes. Now, speaking of newness and mistakes, let's talk about Caitlin Clark and the Indiana Fever. They are finally on the board with their first win of the season. They beat the Los Angeles Sparks on Friday night. They then got crushed by the Las Vegas Aces the following day, but it's fine. It was a back-to-back. The Aces are one of the three best teams in the WNBA. I believe that they won the title last year, but so we're just not going to talk about that. We're just going to ignore the fact that they lost 99-80 against the Aces, whatever. Now, I want to focus on that win against the Sparks because the win against the Sparks was one of the better performances that we have seen from Caitlin Clark in the WNBA. And when I say that, don't go look at the box score, because if you go and you look at the box score, you're going to see that she didn't shoot the ball very well. And, you know, whenever we talk about good performances, especially from someone like Caitlin Clark, who, you know, was known for her ability to shoot the basketball, and we look and we're like, oh, like she didn't shoot it well. Like how can you say that she played well? Well, she didn't shoot it well early. She made a couple big shots late. Like when the Fever needed her to really put the Sparks away, she had a couple threes, got into the lane. Like she played really well down the stretch. She also finished with the near triple-double, 11 points, 10 rebounds, 8 assists. The best part about her performance, though, by far, was that she only had 2 turnovers. And that is the number that I'm going to continue to look at throughout the season. Okay, like the turnover number for, you know, Caitlin Clark and for the Fever team as a whole should continue to go down, right? Because the toughest thing for new players to adjust to is the speed of the game. Okay, point guards at any level of basketball usually turn the ball over more when they go up a level. Okay, that's just the way that it goes, right? Because the game speeds up and it takes them a while to get accustomed to the new speed of the game. And, you know, the Friday night against the Sparks was the first time that Caitlin Clark looked like she was in complete control. Okay, like the shooting, that's going to get better. Okay, she shot it well in college, and it'll eventually translate to the WNBA. It was just nice seeing her have a game where it didn't feel like she was constantly being sped up throughout the game. Like she's getting better. The Fever are improving with her. You can tell that they're a little more prepared for these passes than they were, you know, the first couple games of the season. I do think that's another reason why her turnovers are going down. Her teammates just know to look for the basketball. You know, it just makes things easier. So Caitlin Clark is improving, and the Fever are improving with her. I think a large part of why they lost by 19 to the Aces is because, one, the Aces are really good, and two, it was a back-to-back. Like, those are really tough, especially when you're, you know, not playing back-to-backs at home. When you're back-to-backs out on the road, you know, you fly from Indy to Seattle, and then Seattle down to LA, and then LA to Las Vegas. Like, that's just a lot of travel in a pretty short amount of time. I believe that the Fever are playing again tonight against the Seattle Storm. They played a really close game last week. So if you got nothing else going on, you might as well watch that. Now, football season's approaching. It's like we are 15 weeks away from week 1 of the NFL season. Can't wait. Okay, like I'm ready to cross these 15 weeks off, and I'm ready to talk about the Colts. I'm ready to talk about the NFL. I'm ready to talk about college football. I'm ready to talk about all of it. And, you know, some people are already talking about it. The Colts hype train is fully in motion. Okay, Mina Kimes of ESPN came out on Friday of last week and, you know, said some stuff about the Colts, and she said some stuff about Athony Richardson, and she basically said that she expects to see a large jump from Anthony Richardson this season. Dan responded to it on Twitter. In case you missed it, here is what she said. Here is Mina Kimes on Anthony Richardson and why he's set to make a year 2 leap.
But I really believe Anthony Richardson can take a big leap this year for a number of reasons. One, Shane Steichen confirmed last season what we all believed when he was hired from Philadelphia. He is a brilliant play caller. Yeah. Remarkably quarterback-friendly offense for Gardner Minshew, despite some up and down play from the quarterback. I thought it was very encouraging to see that Colts offensive line play more like they did back in 2020 or so or before then, after some regression, which is, of course, meaningful for Richardson. And then the group of skill players. One of my favorite picks in the entire draft was A.D. Mitchell going to the Colts, in part because of his upside as a true X receiver, but also because of how he fits in with Michael Pittman Jr. and Josh Downs. I view them as very complementary, with Mitchell being the guy who can really take a top off of defense and win downfield. Everything is set up for Richardson. I haven't even mentioned Jonathan Taylor, by the way. He just has to take that leap, but I think he is entering a situation where he will be set up.
That was Mina Kimes of ESPN discussing Anthony Richardson and why he's set to make a big leap. And she highlighted a lot of things that you're going to hear people say about the Colts that are good. Shane Steichen appears to be a brilliant play caller. Okay, he won 9 games last year with Gardner Minshew as his starting quarterback. Gardner Minshew, he's a backup. He's a really good backup. Okay, when you win that many games with a backup, then you're doing something right. Okay, like they're going to say that he's in a quarterback-friendly system. And look, I don't know enough about football to tell you whether or not it's quarterback-friendly, but what I can tell you is that Jalen Hurts wasn't very good, and then Shane Steichen showed up, and Jalen Hurts got better. Okay, and Gardner Minshew was a career backup who'd kind of bounced around. He's kind of like the new Ryan Fitzpatrick, okay, high-end backup, low-end starter. And he shows up, he plays for Shane Steichen, and he puts together a really good season to a point where he can now go compete for a starting job in Las Vegas. Okay, so I don't know if the system is quarterback-friendly or not. What I do know is that Shane Steichen appears to be really good at his job. Okay, the Colts offensive line was good last year, should be good again, I guess. They have a good group of skill position players around Anthony Richardson, Michael Pittman Jr., who I've discussed ad nauseum on this show and on Dan's show. I think he's really good too. Don't think that he's quite a one, but he's back. He caught over 100 balls last year. Josh Downs is back. He should be better at coming off of a really good rookie campaign. And then A.D. Mitchell, everybody keeps saying, was a fantastic pick in the second round of the draft. And of course, Jonathan Taylor's back and healthy, and hopefully he's going to play more than, 6 games or however many he played last year. Everything is set up for Anthony Richardson to be good. I will agree with that fact. Okay, the thing that I want to see, though, is what kind of quarterback is Anthony Richardson? Okay, is he a quarterback that elevates the roster around him, or is he a quarterback that is elevated by the roster and the coaching around him? There are quarterbacks like Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson that it doesn't matter who's around them. They're going to elevate the players around them because they're just that good. Okay, we saw Mahomes do this last year, right? Like the Kansas City offense didn't have much talent outside of Mahomes and an aging Travis Kelce. And they won the Super Bowl because they were able to score points when they needed to. We've seen Josh Allen elevate a mediocre, talented Bills team for the past few years, right? Like outside of Stephon Diggs, they haven't had very much talent up in Buffalo surrounding Josh Allen, and they still won a lot of games because Josh Allen is a really good player. Okay, Lamar Jackson has done it too. Before this year, Mark Andrews was really his only reliable receiving threat. Okay, and then this year, they go out and they draft Zay Flowers, they bring in Odell Beckham Jr., and all that kind of stuff, right? And because of that, Lamar Jackson had one of the best years of his career. But either way, when the talent wasn't as great around him, he was able to elevate those guys. Those 3 quarterbacks are the epitome of what quarterbacks that elevate the offense look like. Then there are other starting caliber quarterbacks that get elevated by the things around them. For example, let's look at the Miami Dolphins. Tua Tagovailoa is elevated by Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, and his coach, Mike McDaniels. Okay, he just is. He's a very capable starter, but if you ask him to go out and win a game for you, he's not going to be able to do it. Okay, Brock Purdy is elevated by Kyle Shanahan, Deebo Samuel, George Kittle, and Brandon Ayuk. Okay, Jalen Hurts, he's elevated by Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown. Like all 3 of those quarterbacks are very capable of winning games. All 3 of those quarterbacks have won games throughout their time on their respective teams. But they had to be supported properly. Mahomes, Allen, Lamar, they are the support. Like that's what they are. They can just go be great despite having a lack of talent around them. And that's why they're 3 of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. And that's why their teams always have a chance at making a run to the Super Bowl. And the question I have is, into which of these 2 categories is Anthony Richardson going to fall into? Okay. In the early parts of the season, I think it's going to be really hard to tell what kind of quarterback he's going to be because he is walking into a good situation. I don't think that we can deny that. I think Shane Steichen showed us enough last year that we should have faith in him to be a good play caller and to put Anthony Richardson in the right spots to succeed. Hey, Michael Pittman, as many questions as I have about him, he had a good year last year. Caught over 100 balls, over 1,000 yards receiving, all that good stuff, right? Like he's going to be a reliable receiving option for Anthony Richardson. Jonathan Taylor he's won offensive player of the year. He won it 2 years ago, right? Like he's going to be a reliable option out of the backfield. Josh Downs was really good out of the slot last year. People keep telling us how great Adonai Mitchell is supposed to be. So I think early in the year, if Anthony Richardson gets off to a good start, it's going to be hard to tell what type of quarterback he is. Okay, like, and because of that, because there's so much talent, and Anthony Richardson is in such a good situation, if Anthony Richardson finds success early, given his stature and how athletic he is and how eye popping he is, because look, like when you look at the TV, it's very easy to find Anthony Richardson because he's just bigger than everybody else on the field. Okay, like he just grabs your attention. And because of that, if he's successful early, people are going to be very quick to overrate him. By the end of the year, though, it's going to be obvious which one he is. Okay, Patrick Mahomes walked into a great situation. Dare I say, one of the best situations ever for a young quarterback with Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce, and Andy Reid. But it was plain as day that Patrick Mahomes was a guy who could elevate the offense when there wasn't as much talent around him. Okay, and this season, we will hopefully find out whether or not Anthony Richardson is a quarterback who can elevate the offense or if he's a quarterback that can win games if the situation's perfect. I hope he's the latter. I hope he's a guy who can elevate the offense around him because I do think because there will be moments in the season where Anthony Richardson has to do that. There will be moments in the season where we're sitting around and we're like, all right, Anthony Richardson, we got 2 minutes left in the game. You have to go and be the dude. And that's really where these two tiers of quarterback separate themselves. Okay, like when Tua has the ball in the last 2 minutes of a game, I don't have faith in the Dolphins to win. But when Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes or Lamar Jackson has the ball in the final 2 minutes of a game, I'm like, okay, like they're probably going to win. Right? Like that's just the way that it feels. And I want to see which type of guy Anthony Richardson's going to be. Okay, is he going to be a guy that is capable of putting teams away, or is he going to be a guy who like has to kind of be in the perfect situation to win? We're going to find all that out here in about 15 weeks when the NFL season kicks off. I got more stuff coming up here on the Pacers. Matt Murphy is joining me here in about 5 minutes for the second hour of the Real Jonathan Smith Show. Matt Murphy, former basketball coach, is going to join me to talk about the Pacers and their season as a whole in this playoff run. That is coming up here in about 5 minutes. What's going on? It's the Real Jonathan Smith Show here on Indies Sports Tickets. And my guy, Matt Murphy, joins the show, as he usually does on whenever the first day of the week is. And we're just always on the same wavelength because he's sporting an Anthony Richardson shirt. And I just did a whole thing on Anthony Richardson. So now that Pacer season is over, how excited are you for the upcoming football season?
Well, as fun as sorry, my voice is kind
I
of jacked
cannot
up.
hear you, buddy.
Can you hear me now?
That's not good. Wait. Now try. Nope, can't hear you.
No?
There we go. There it is.
We're
There's-
live. Let's
There
go.
it is.
Wouldn't be Tuesday if we didn't have some technical difficulties.
That's right.
Apologies, I've got some allergies going on. But yes, so last night, obviously, unfortunate season coming to an end. But that's why we had to rep the AR shirt as well as for the shoe cup, drinking my much needed water.
There you go.
Ready
So
to go. Football in 100 days. Can't wait.
we're 15 weeks away from the season starting.
Yeah.
We're counting down.
Already.
Amelia's dreading it, but it's fine. She'll be okay.
I can't wait.
We got a long way to go.
Yeah,
So
wait.
I brought you on to mainly talk hoops, but
Yeah.
since I did just talk about AR and your sport in the shirt, I have to ask, what are your expectations for him this next season?
The beauty of it, I think, is I still see him as like a 1.5 year quarterback. Like in terms of like he has less than half a year of experience. So I mean, I expect it to be exciting, but I really do see him still as. I don't think he should have the same level of expectations of like a CJ Stroud, who's played a full first year and had a lot of success. While AR had plenty of success in the 4.5 games he played, I still think you still view him, sort of like he's played about a half year in my mind. So, I would expect him to be exciting though. Honestly, I think he's still going to make some mistakes that he would, when that rookies might. But I do expect him to be really fun. And this is the type of Colts team and offense that has a lot of fun pieces. So expect it to be fun. Do I expect them to win 12 games? No, but who knows? Who knows? They've got some talent, so we'll see.
We will. I'm very intrigued to see how they look. Joined by my guy, Matt Murphy, former basketball coach, professional sports viewer as well, on top of all things. #1 ambassador for the city of Indianapolis. So if you're trying to get people to move here, this is the guy that
Yes,
you
sir.
call.
Yes,
So
sir.
I'm interested to see how they look. I think they should make the playoffs. I think that's a fair expectation, especially given the schedule. I don't think their schedule's too daunting.
Yeah.
So like, if they make the playoffs, like
How many wins do they need to get to the playoffs though?
10
10.
10
Okay.
probably.
They can get to 10 with the schedule they have. Key players staying healthy. They should get to 10.
They should. I'm excited to watch AD Mitchell, man. Like
Right.
people keep telling me how great he's gonna be.
Yeah.
And we'll see though. I'm trying not to get too excited. Like he is a rookie. It takes these guys to kind of come along a little bit, but it has not taken Andrew Nimhard very long to come along and be impactful. Games 3 and 4 reminded me of Jalen Brunson in 2022 when he was playing for the Mavs and Luka went out. Very similar of like, see this guy step up, he's got the ball more, and it's like, oh, this guy can kind of shoulder an offensive load. What did you think about him in games 3 and 4?
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely gotten a lot of attention now, which is great. Just nationally, I think a lot of people are noticed over the last 2 games. Like, hey, I mean, both games having like 25 plus and like 10 and 9 assists. So, my brother Eric, he said a lot this past week. Like, Nimhard's going to earn himself a big contract and probably play himself off of the Pacers if he's not careful, considering he's got 2 more years left on his contract. And it depends what they do with Pascal and everything, but a lot of people are going to be due to be paid around when Nimhard's going to be due to get paid for the Pacers. And so he was outstanding. I think he really showed that he could be really, really good. I do think, keeping in mind that his season averages wouldn't say that he's a star. I was honestly, this is going to be really interesting offseason, given, I mean, he played well in the postseason in general, but those 2 last games, right, there's so much hype. And I just, tend to be more like, hey, let's see how he does in a different role maybe next year. Hopefully give him the ball a little bit more, given he's shown that he can handle that responsibility. Would be interested to see him. What happens with TJ McConnell, given you have Nembhard run the show, run the point, and do a really good job of it in these last couple games. And honestly did a pretty good job when Halliburton was out earlier in the year. So what do you do with McConnell then? Like, do you pay him? And if you pay him, does that stunt some of Nembhard's usability as a point guard? It's interesting. They've got a lot of decisions to make on, and that's certainly one of them. Like with how good Nembhard has been, what do you do with TJ McConnell? I'm just excited to see him develop and grow. I mean, this is a big step, and believer in, hey, everything that happens can be used for good. And Halliburton going out, and certainly even the Pacers getting swept like that, that's one of the things that you see that turns out for good, that's going to end up where they're going to be better because Nembhard, I think you saw him mature right in front of your eyes over the last couple of years.
Yeah, this is my guy, Matt Murphy, former basketball coach and just lover of all things Indy. We're talking Pacers here, and I think that the reason why the Pacers lost this series is because, one, the Celtics are just more experienced. I think we're seeing the same thing in the Mavs and the Wolves series of the team that's been there before is going to win the series. But the other thing is, like, Pacers just don't have enough wing defenders. Like, they've got Nesmith to put on Tatum, and then no one left for Jaylen Brown. And Jaylen Brown had quite the series because of that. And that's the other thing. How important is the development of Jarris Walker over this summer in order for the Pacers to potentially compete with a team like the Celtics next season?
So I was about to stop you and say, well, they did have a really good wing defender, but he just didn't see the floor. It's Jarris Walker. He's the type of player that I think they needed to be playable in this series, especially when Halliburton goes down. I love Doug McDermott as a person, as a player in the league. He shouldn't be on the floor in this type of series. I mean, in a bench shooting role, maybe, which he was, but like if you put Jarris on the floor, he's just going to give you so much more defensively. And honestly, Doug didn't give you that much offensively either. I mean, I think he made a couple shots. He made a tip in, and then he made a three the last couple games, but he's not giving you that much besides just spacing the floor anyway. So his development, I think, part of what I was honestly not thrilled with how they handled his development this year, because there are moments where you actually needed a guy with his skill set. It wasn't just, hey, throw him out there to get experience. It was, you kind of handcuffed yourself in the regular season when you didn't play him, and you played him in the G League a little bit, and hey, we're just not going to really give him minutes. You kind of handcuffed yourself in the playoffs because it's unfair to just throw him in that spot.
Yeah.
But the reason why you play him in spurts and minutes in the regular season is so he'd be ready to take a step if needed in the playoffs. But they couldn't really do that because of how they handled him in the regular season. So his development is key, yes. But honestly, you would have just liked to see them manage him a little bit better in the season, where there were just spots where you could have plugged him in a little bit more. And when he was in, he honestly showed a ton of promise, like as a defender, as a shooter, as a passer, just
as a passer especially.
Yeah. So it just getting him in minutes more consistently, even in spurts. I think they missed opportunities to do that in the regular season. Ergo, you can't put him in the postseason and like that. So his development would be big, but it's unfortunate the way he was handled this year, honestly.
It really was. I have flashbacks as you were talking about him of the game against the Clippers where he's defending Kawhi, and he does a really good job. You know me. Like, when I'm bored, like, I'm gonna watch some sort of sport. So like I watched some Mad Ants games this year. Yeah. And they've got Jarris like playing point guard. Yeah. And part of me is like, I like that he has the ball in his hands, but the other part of me is like, he's never gonna have the ball in his hands when he plays for the Pacers. Yeah. And because of Halliburton and now Nembhard, and if they keep McConnell, like, he's gonna have the ball. And so I'm just really interested to see how he looks going forward. The biggest thing though is, can he catch and shoot? Can he play defense? If he can do those two things, he's gonna play 25 minutes a night next year. You were talking about off-season decisions coming up for the Pacers with McConnell. How does Mathurin's development impact that too? Because before he got hurt, he was reaching a new level of like hitting step back threes, like the shot creation and the shot making was looking like it was about to go up. How does that impact what you think they're going to do in the offseason?
It's so difficult, John, because you have so many good young players. Like I'll give Kevin Pritchard a ton of credit here. Like they've drafted really well over the last couple of years. They really have, and they've got a lot of good young pieces. You got a lot of decisions to make. Like I think the key in this has been Shepard playing just really efficient, quality minutes on both ends. He was starting in the Eastern Conference Finals as a rookie. Like I'm not saying that's going to continue, but you throw him into the mix too, and you just have so many kind of guards / small wings on this roster, and you just run out of space. You really do. Like you look at these really good teams across the league. A lot of them don't play and aren't as deep as the Pacers, and that depth got them somewhere this year. But it comes to a point like young depth, really good young depth means people are going to need to be paid down the road in a couple of years, right? If they're showing out now, even on the bench, like Mathurin on the bench, he's going to need to get paid. Like teams are going to want to have a guy like him, a guy like Nembhard. So you just got a lot of decisions to make. I think right now, I think you're in an interesting spot because of that young talent. What do you do with guys like Obi Toppin? Like does keeping Obi Toppin take a spot that take Jarris Walker minutes, right? Like if you re-sign Pascal, like what do you see Obi as, and what do you see Jarris Walker as? Does that affect? I mean, I loved Obi Toppin this year. I thought he was excellent. He really was really good. Like I would love to have him back on the team. But who do you not play because of keeping Obi Toppin? Who are you not playing by re-signing TJ McConnell in terms of the Nembhard having the ball in his hand? So they've got a lot of decisions to make, man. But the good news is it's the good problems to have. They're really good problems to have. You would love to have a young core like they do with a couple superstars on the team, or stars on the team like Halliburton and Siakam, and then some veteran presence with Turner, and then a ton of young talent. Like that's awesome. It's great.
Yeah, it really is. Like the Pacers are in a good spot. Once again, joined by my guy Matt Murphy, former basketball coach, has watched a ton of basketball during these playoffs.
Yeah.
And I think you're exactly right. Like this is like the Pacers are ahead of schedule. That is kind of the point that I've really been trying to drive home of like their over under win total this year was set at like 34.5.
Yep.
And we look up and they're in the Eastern Conference Finals. This team is ahead of schedule. The Halliburton emergence has been awesome. Pascal Siakam, I feel like an idiot because I came on the air and I was like, should they give him a max? And then he just went nuts for over the course of the next like 8 games. And so like they're in a really good spot going forward. The thing that I'm really intrigued by is what does the rest of the East look like, and how does that impact what they do? Because like I think we saw the Timberwolves these past couple off seasons. They're like, we're gonna have to beat Denver. And so they built this roster around the idea of like, we have to beat them. And it works, but then they ran into Dallas and they're going to lose. And when we look at the East, like I think there's a couple other teams that are young and look pretty similar to Indiana. Like Orlando is going to be a problem going forward. Like they're going to be really good. Boston's not going anywhere. Brown and Tatum are like 27 and 28, 26 and 27.
Yeah.
And so it's going to be interesting to see how they're going to build going forward. But I think a major part of any team and how they play is their head coach. There have been questions about Carlisle, which isn't surprising because there's not a fan base in the world of any sport that likes their head coach. I'm just convinced everybody hates whoever their head coach is. Like I'm sure there are Spurs fans out there that don't like Popovich for some reason, right? And so what is your opinion on Carlisle? I know we've talked about it a little bit off the air, but how do you think he did in these playoffs?
So any coach that takes this type of team to the Eastern Conference Finals, you have to give their flowers to. I think Rick Carlisle is one of the best, and this is, in my mind, undisputed. That jersey is really tough, by the way.
Thank you.
Any coach that produces a historic offense like the Pacers did this season, he's a great coach. But in my mind, he's more of like a philosophy. He's great as a philosophy coach. Like and he's even come out and said this. They're not a play team. They're not a run sets team. They're a philosophies team. Like they have philosophies that they stick to on both ends, defensively for better or for worse. because they honestly that they weren't great defensively this year, but offensively, again,
How much of the defense though is, what they're running scheme wise, and how much of it is they just don't have the personnel to be a good defensive team?
Yeah, part of it. I mean, there are parts of it. Yes, in my mind, when you miss box outs as much as the Pacers do, part of that is on coaching. That's not a defensive philosophy. That's just straight up like your players aren't boxing out. But part of that is coaching. Like coaches are held responsible for what the players do, and so
Yeah.
personnel wise, yeah, maybe they don't have great defensive personnel, but they do things really poorly that are coachable, if that makes sense. That are
Yeah.
partially enforced by the coach, right? Even though they're not the ones physically doing it like the players are. So we'll say that. But either way, really, really good philosophy coach. Like one of the best this season for sure, because of the output that they had offensively. It was incredible, historic. Again, it was a top 2 in NBA history, offense and in terms of offenses. I think, and again, this is where we might disagree. I don't think he's a very good in-game coach. Meaning,
I would agree.
feel for timeouts. Meaning, hey, I'm going to let my guys go. You think about just the type of collapses they've had in terms of game 1. You have the ball up 3, under 10 seconds left. Game 3, you're up 8 with 2 minutes to go. Even last night, you didn't score for the last 3 minutes and 30 seconds. I think Nembhard's, I don't know if you saw this, Nembhard's or middle of the game, in-game interview that they had. And, which I don't like those, by the way. The players should be in the huddle. Like I wanted Nembhard in the huddle there, and a have to have it game. And Nembhard's in the fourth quarter. He's talking to a reporter, which is ridiculous. Either way, Nembhard says in that interview, he says we have to play fast and we have to play random. That's part of and I think he's portraying part of that philosophy they have is playing fast and playing random. They're not a set team. They're random. They're play loose and quick. Part of why you lost all 3 of those games is playing random because you have a really, really good defensive team in Boston that has players like Drew Holiday, Derek White. You play random against those guys, you're going to turn the ball over. That's what they did. Game 1, turn the ball over twice or 3 times in the last minute, 30 seconds. Right? Game 3, same thing. Game 4, same thing. It was the same script in all 3 of those games. You playing random leads to turnovers if it's not disciplined randomness. And so part of what I think Rick, and that's the philosophy that did so much good for them this year. In those clutch moments, you cannot play random like that against a team like Boston. You can't. And like whether it's timeout, calling the timeouts in certain spots, I just with a team like that that's inexperienced, playing random leads to this. And I hopefully he learns as a coach from this that hey, playing random's great for 47 minutes. It's really hard to do in the last minute and be really productive consistently. So yeah, I think he's a great philosophy coach. In-game coach, he needs to improve straight up.
I agree. For the most part, one of the things that I don't know. Once again, joined by my guy Matt Murphy, former basketball coach. One of the things that I've said a decent amount on the show is when you go back and you watch the post game of Rick Carlisle and you hear him talk, like reporters will ask him about like specific stretches, and his response is always, "I haven't watched the tape yet."
Yeah.
And so he can't really give an answer. And then I'll watch, Joe Mazzulla for Boston, and they'll ask him about a stretch, and he can recall the play-by-play of everything that's happening. And part of me is like, is this just like an age thing? Is it because he's, kind of getting older that he just can't remember everything that happens? And not because he's old, but just because like a lot happens, and when you're older, your brain just doesn't move as fast. Like I'm not trying to be ageist here, but I'm just saying, like, I think that's a real possibility. And if that's the case, like he needs assistant coaches that can help him do that. That's, I think, more of the answer. Because I think you're right. Like I think game to game, he's great, but in game, like there are definitely some questionable things and decisions that get made. Because like the Pacers always start the game well. Like they always do, because their game plan coming out is really good. And then, the Celtics or whoever, they make some sort of adjustment, and there's never a counter. And so that is, I think you're exactly right. Before I let you go, the legendary Bill Walton passed yesterday. Do you have any thoughts on him?
Yeah, I think people lose sight in when he was still with us, when he was on air. people lose sight of what a joyful human he was, and people were quick to make fun of and to kind of poke fun at him for kind of the sporadic comments and the different things. Man, just he's a really, really joyful dude, and I just hope that's not lost. And it's honestly, I think, a lesson that we can all learn is like with someone who says things like that are kind of out there, puts himself out as kind of funky and weird things, like not looking at him and judging him and his character just for those, like looking at all the great things he was, and hopefully, kind of how he lived and did so joyously, like such a joyous human. Um, just having that legacy, that be part of his legacy, I think is huge. Because a lot of people again remember the funny things he did on camera and the things he would say, things go on monologues. You're like, this dude's nuts, but he's so joyful, and so just that. Obviously, RIP to a legend, great basketball mind. But yeah,
Great player.
Yeah, great player. Yeah, and just to remember him for his joy and who he was, and I think anyone. And the last thing I'll say, anyone, Bill or anyone who's passed away, like looking at the impact they left on people, not the impact of things they did per se, but like the impact that they had on people. I think is a big look at like who they were character wise, as a person, and looking at the impact that he had on people around him. I think speaks volumes about his character. So RIP.
It does. It really does. Like I think a lot of times when professional athletes die that had the success that Bill Walton had, we talk about how successful they were, and when people talk about him, they're like, "I remember when I was 12 years old and he won, the title," and I just like that's a core memory for whatever reason. Like with Bill Walton, everybody's got a story about how he was just nice to them. And I think it really speaks volumes to everything that you were saying, Matt. Thank you for your time as always. I'm sure we'll keep having you on to talk about whatever else is going on around Indy. Thanks for your time, man.
Yeah, take care.
See ya. That was my guy, Matt Murphy, former basketball coach, just a dude who loves Indianapolis sports. And he's always great to have on because he comes on with a level head and he tells it like it is. When we come back here in a few minutes, we're going to start to kind of recap the show, cover everything we talked about, in hour one. We're going to talk about Pacers, Celtics, why the Pacers lost that series. That's coming up here in about 3 minutes. What's going on the Real Jonathan Smith Show here on Indies Sports Tickets? Pacers got swept last night, which is still kind of surprising because teams just, like, even bad teams don't get swept. It just doesn't happen. And the Pacers got swept. It got just, and I think the frustrating part of it is, like, there is a real world where the Pacers could be up 3-1, but they aren't, right? In the final minutes of games 1, 3, and 4, the Celtics executed. Pacers didn't. The difference was experience for a large part. Everyone gets better at whatever it is that they do with experience. And, for the Pacers, the most telling stat of this series is that the Celtics outscored the Pacers in the final 3 minutes in overtime over the course of the 4 games by 25. And the Celtics outscored the Pacers in the first 3 quarters of each game by only 2 points, right? So for the first 3 quarters, it was incredibly even. Through the first 9 minutes of the fourth quarter, it was incredibly even. And then those last 3 minutes, the Celtics would execute and the Pacers wouldn't. And I'm chalking a lot of that up to experience, because the history of the league tells us the teams that are experienced, the teams that have playoff scars, they just tend to win more. Okay. Like, whenever you're new to something, you're going to make mistakes. Every Pacer, except for Pascal Siakam, was new to the conference finals. And a lot of them were new to the playoffs in general. And because of that, we saw them make mistakes down the stretch when games were close. They turned the ball over. They missed shots that they usually make. They had a chance to grab the game by the balls and force a game 5 last night, and they didn't, because they had mistakes. They didn't score in the final 3.5 minutes. And, like, this happens to everybody. Okay, like, when you're new to something, you make mistakes. I remember when I was in college and I decided to get into radio. I'll never forget, I'm sitting with my advisor. She tells me that I should take this radio class because it's an easy A and it won't get in the way of the baseball schedule that I had for that spring. I'm like, okay, sounds good. So I take this radio class. First day, I'm cutting up, not paying any attention because it was supposed to be an easy A. In hindsight, it was. But first day of class, I'm not paying any attention. I'm, in the back, talking with my buddy, and my professor's explaining, like, this is how the radio station works. This is how you run the board. This is how you turn the microphone on, all that kind of stuff. I'm not paying any attention. To close the class, he says that our grades are entirely dependent upon our ability to host an hour-long radio show. Yippee, right? So I'm panicking because I don't know how to do anything. I sign up for my time. Later that week, I have to do my first show. And it wasn't very good. I listened to it last night as I was prepping because I figured I was going to tell this story today. And it was bad. I show up. I don't know how to run anything. So I figure out how to stop the music that's playing. And I stopped it for an hour and talked for an hour straight. And so much of that show was about Aaron Rodgers, which is a mistake because I was in Southwest Arkansas, surrounded by Dallas Cowboy and Arkansas Razorback fans. And I'm talking about a team in Wisconsin, okay? And it was a big mistake. But, I really enjoyed it, obviously. And now this is, what I plan on doing for a long time. And my point is, when I was new to radio in Arkadelphia, Arkansas, I made a lot of mistakes. I didn't focus on the teams that were local. I had bad ideas. It wasn't good. I'll never forget. I tried to do, like, this jokey segment one time and it was awful and I had to work through it. And it was bad. I made mistakes because I was new. Right. But over the course of those 4 years, I got better. And I ended up here in Indianapolis, where I'm, extremely blessed. There aren't many 24-year-olds who get to host a show in a top 40 market like Indy. And if I was as green now as I was back then, I wouldn't be doing this show. But I've gotten better because I've been doing this for 6 years. But here's the thing. I'm doing radio in a large market for the first time. Like, I make mistakes every day because I haven't done radio on this level before. And that is what we saw from the Pacers last night, right? Like, these guys have been playing basketball their entire lives. These guys, some of these guys have been in the league for, 4, 5, even 6 years. And they're struggling late in the Eastern Conference Finals because they've never been there before. We're seeing the exact same thing from the Timberwolves as well. Late in games, they aren't executing against Dallas. Meanwhile, Dallas was in the Western Conference Finals 2 years ago, and they are executing, right? Because their best players have been there before, and that just hasn't been, and that's just not the case for the Pacers, right? Like, the most consistent player for the Pacers in the Eastern Conference Finals has been Pascal Siakam. Do you know why? because he's won the Eastern Conference Finals before. Okay, the playoffs are entirely different from the regular season to the postseason, and players have to get used to that before they win. Like you have to obtain these playoff scars before you're able to win a title, before you're even able to get to the finals. Okay, like Michael Jordan didn't win his first NBA championship until he turned 27, and before he did, he lost in the Eastern Conference Finals twice. LeBron James was 27 when he won his first title. He lost in the Eastern Conference Finals once before to the Orlando Magic. He lost in the finals to the Spurs. He lost in the finals to the Dallas Mavericks. And then he finally broke through in 2012. Okay? Like, it's hard to win deep in the playoffs if you don't have these playoff scars. And the Pacers didn't have any scars before this playoff series, really before the playoffs started in general. And the Celtics, who did have playoff scars, swept them in large part because of it. Okay, and now the Pacers have plenty of playoff scars to look back on. They're going to look back and they'll be like, oh, like that really deep bruise that's never gone away. That's from game one when we couldn't inbound the basketball. That's just the way it works. The Boston Celtics, like they've been, like this group of guys, like they've been to the Eastern Conference Finals 6 times in the last 8 years, and they don't have any jewelry to show for it. The Timberwolves out west, like they're likely going to get swept by the Mavericks tonight. Their series has been very similar to the Pacers and Celtics. The Mavs have out-executed the Timberwolves down the stretch, right? And when we look at the Timberwolves, outside of Mike Conley, they don't have any playoff scars. Okay, Anthony Edwards had never been this deep in the playoffs before. Karl Anthony Towns had never been this deep in the playoffs before. Jaden McDaniels, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, like you worked through that Timberwolves lineup and you realize like they don't have the playoff experience. And it's the same thing with the Pacers. They don't have the playoff experience to win close, tight games. Okay, I've got my notepad in my bag, and if you look on it, like I take like a million notes, like too many notes. I didn't take as many last night because the story of this series was the game's going to be close through the first 3 quarters, and if it's close late, the Celtics are going to out-execute the Pacers, and that is what happened time and time again, and this is why experience matters. Okay, it's a pattern that we have seen happen in sports throughout the entire time that sports have been around. When 2 teams are both talented, usually the more experienced team wins, and that is what we saw in this series. Late in games, the team that had been there more, the Boston Celtics, out-executed the team that hadn't, the Indiana Pacers. Okay, after the game last night, Rick Carlisle was asked why they couldn't execute down the stretch. Here was his response.
You know, I look at the process and the level of fight, our situation with personnel, all that kind of stuff. I mean, there's no excuses. I mean, these guys, you know, Boston has a great team. You know, they led the league from wire to wire and really ran away with it. And look, they're opportunistic. They don't want this thing to go on any longer. Give them credit for the stuff they pulled off at the end of the last 2 games. They simply made more plays. You know, they blocked shots. They got offensive rebounds. They made key shots. We were unable. I love the fact that, you know, our guys never wavered competitively one inch or millimeter or anything like that. You know, we played at a great level, and we made our share of mistakes. Like tonight, you know, we gambled probably 5 times in the second half that led to at least 10 points for them. And those are discipline type things that you have to learn in this kind of environment, you know. And you know, you swing and miss and they get a 3, you swing and miss, they get a layup. And it's just, and then if you're unable to match at the other end, I mean, it makes it very, very difficult, and then momentum shifts. And so, you know, those are some of the lessons. Those are like, you know, strategic things and discipline and you know, stuff like that. So
that was Pacers head coach Rick Carlisle on why they couldn't execute late, and he hit on it there, kind of in the middle of, like, you have to learn in this type of environment how to do it, and the Pacers just didn't know. They turn the ball over, they miss shots that they normally make late in games, and that's ultimately why they lost. That and their inability to defend on the perimeter, because they just have a lack of big wing defenders. The other thing is Celtics are just better than the Pacers. They're the better team. Okay, the Celtics are more talented than the Pacers. Like, the Celtics had the two best players in this series. Okay, Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown were the two best players in the series. Okay, Halliburton, he's continued to develop. He's going to continue to get better as well, but he's not better than Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown right now. He's just not. Pascal Siakam was great. He was consistent. He was the most consistent guy for the Pacers in this series. But guess what? He's not better than Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown. And when you have the two best players in the series, you're probably going to win the series. Okay? Biggest advantage the Pacers had throughout these 4 games was their bench. Okay, McConnell, Toppin, and Ben Shepherd, they all had impacts on the series. They've all had impacts throughout the entire playoffs as a whole. And the depth of the Pacers is a large part of why they made this deep of a run. But when you get, to the Eastern Conference Finals, you're not picking a team because they have depth. You just aren't. Okay, when you get this deep into the conference finals, you ask yourself 2 questions. Who has the best player in the series and who has the better 5? Like, whose top 5 players are better, the Pacers or the Celtics? And the answer to that question is the Celtics. Okay, like, that's another large reason of why they won this game. Late in games, the 5 players that the Celtics had on the floor overall were better than the 5 players that the Pacers had on the floor. Okay, like, the Celtics should have won this series. They're going to the NBA Finals with less than 20 losses. That puts them in very elite company. Okay, they should have won the series. They had the 2 best players, and their roster as a whole is just better than Indiana's. Like, there's really nothing else to it. Like, there's no galaxy brain take here. Okay, the Celtics are just the better basketball team, and the better team won the 7-game series. And that's the whole point of having a series. The best team should win the series, and the better team, the Boston Celtics, did. No way around it. No way around it. And there's also no way of getting around the Indianapolis Colts hype train that people are just chugging along full speed ahead. When we come back, Mina Kimes had some comments on the Colts. Pretty interesting. I will play that audio for you when we come back here in about 4 minutes. What's going on? The Real Jonathan Smith Show here on Indy Sports Ticket from 10 to noon, wrapping up the show here. I got to talk about Athony Richardson because Indianapolis Colts football is 15 weeks away. We are 15 weeks away from fantastic Sundays. And the hype for the Colts and those Sundays just continues to chug along. People are talking about him. Like, people are really expecting a breakout season from Athony Richardson, even though we only saw him play 4 games last year, even though we only saw him throw like 84 passes, my bad. People are like, oh, he's going to be great. And I'm just not sold on that. But Mina Kimes of ESPN is. She went on TV on Friday and talks about Athony Richardson and why she expects for him to make a year 2 leap. Here is Mina Kimes explaining her thoughts.
But I really believe Anthony Richardson can take a big leap this year for a number of reasons. One, Shane Steichen confirmed last season what we all believed when he was hired from Philadelphia. He is a brilliant play caller. Yeah. Remarkably quarterback-friendly offense for Gardner Minshew, despite some up-and-down play from the quarterback. I thought it was very encouraging to see that Colts offensive line play more like they did back in 2020 or so, or before then, after some regression, which is, of course, meaningful for Richardson. And then the group of skill players. One of my favorite picks in the entire draft was A.D. Mitchell going to the Colts, in part because of his upside as a true X receiver, but also because of how he fits in with Michael Pittman Jr. and Josh Downs. I view them as very complementary, with Mitchell being the guy who can really take a top off of defense and win downfield. Everything is set up for Richardson. I haven't even mentioned Jonathan Taylor, by the way. He just has to take that leap, but I think he is entering a situation where he will be set up.
That was Mina Kimes of ESPN explaining why Anthony Richardson is set to have a year 2 leap. I don't know. I'm not really sold on it because, like, we didn't really see enough from him last year to know how good or bad he was. So how can he have a leap? We don't even know how good he was. Now, what Mina Kimes said, I think she highlighted a lot of things that are true and a lot of things that are going to be continued to be said about the Colts going forward. Shane Steichen appears to be a brilliant play caller. He does. He did it in Philadelphia. He left Philadelphia. Jalen Hurts' production went down. He shows up here in Indy, and he's, Gardner Minshew making a halfway decent throw away from making the playoffs. With Gardner Minshew, a guy who's he's a backup quarterback. That's what he is. He's a high-end backup, low-end starter, right? And so, like, he did a good job last year calling plays and putting guys in positions to succeed. Like, Michael Pittman Jr. had the best year of his career last year under Shane Steichen because Shane Steichen did a good job of getting him the ball in good spots. Okay? She said that this is a quarterback-friendly system. I don't know what that means. I'll shoot you straight. I don't know what that means. But, hey, hopefully she's right? Seeing Jalen Hurts and Gardner Minshew succeed tells me that maybe she's right. Like, maybe it is a quarterback-friendly system, but I don't know what that means, so I can't really speak on that. The Colts offensive line should be good again, you would assume. Okay, and they do have a group of skill position players that are pretty good. Michael Pittman Jr. is back. Okay, look, I think, if you've listened to the show, I'm not the biggest Michael Pittman Jr. fan, but look, he caught over 100 balls last year, over 1,000 yards. That's pretty good. That's a good target to have for a young quarterback. Josh Downs had a good rookie campaign. He should be better in year 2. They're bringing in, Athony Mitchell, who everyone keeps saying was one of the steals of the draft. We'll see. I hope that they're right, but I don't know. And then, of course, Jonathan Taylor coming back, a guy who's won Offensive Player of the Year. He's going to be an asset. Like, there are things around Anthony Richardson for him to be good this year. Okay, like, I would agree with Mina Kimes and her saying that everything is set up for Anthony Richardson to be a good player. The thing I want to see, though, is if he's a quarterback that elevates the roster, or if he gets elevated by the roster. Okay, like, there are 2 types of quarterbacks in the NFL. There are your Patrick Mahomeses and Josh Allens and Lamar Jacksons. That doesn't matter what you put around them. They're going to elevate the players around them to a point where the offense is potent. Okay, like we saw Mahomes do this last year. Okay, like the Kansas City offense was Mahomes, an aging Travis Kelce, and a rookie wide receiver in Rice, the guy who's probably going to miss some time this year because he, drove 100 miles an hour in a Lamborghini and crashed it and then ran away and all that fun stuff. Like that was the offense for the Chiefs. And Mahomes was good enough. He elevated that offense to a point where they could win a second Super Bowl. And because of Mahomes, there's a decent chance that they could three-peat, which is something that's never been done in the history of the NFL. Josh Allen has elevated the offense in Buffalo since his third year in the league. It's been him and Stephon Diggs and a bunch of guys that are kind of meh. Seriously, like there hasn't been a lot of talent around Josh Allen in Buffalo, but because Josh Allen is an elevator, they won a lot of games. Okay, Lamar Jackson has done it too. Before this year, he had Mark Andrews and a bunch of meh. That was kind of it. And then, of course, the Ravens go out and they get Zay Flowers and then their offense became better. What a surprise. When you put good players around good quarterbacks, your offense gets better. But those three quarterbacks are the epitome of quarterbacks that elevate offenses. Okay, and then there are other starting caliber quarterbacks that are elevated by the things around them. I think Tua Tagovailoa in Miami is the perfect example of this. His game is elevated by the fact that he's got Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, and Mike McDaniels, his head coach, is an outstanding play caller. Brock Purdy is another good example. He's elevated by Devontae Smith. Brock Purdy gets elevated by Kyle Shanahan, Deebo Samuel, George Kittle, and Brandon Ayuk. Jalen Hurts gets elevated by Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown. Jared Goff was elevated when he was in Los Angeles by Sean McVay, Cooper Kupp. I don't think he played with Odell, but there were good pieces around Jared Goff in L.A. that elevated him to the point where the Rams should make a Super Bowl. Now, Jared Goff, he's being elevated in Detroit, right? Because there's a lot of good players there, and Ben Johnson's one of the best young play callers in the NFL. Like there's those kinds of quarterbacks as well, where it's like, if they have to put the offense on their back, you're probably not going to win. But if you put the right talent around them, then you can be really good and you can even appear in the Super Bowl. And if you don't have to play Patrick Mahomes, which you're probably going to, then, it's a possibility, right? And that's kind of the other tier of starting quarterbacks, where it's like, we like you, you're very capable, but if things aren't perfect, we aren't going to win a ton of games, right? And so that is the question that I want answered from Anthony Richardson this year. Is he an elevator, or is he a guy who gets elevated by those around him? Now, Anthony Richardson, once again, is walking into a good situation. Like I said, I agree with a lot of what Mina Kimes said. Okay, like there's a lot of good things around Anthony Richardson, but we can't anoint him until we actually see him do it. And we didn't see him do it last year because he barely played. He has to stay healthy. That's the number one thing I want to see. I want to see Anthony Richardson play, 16 or 17 games this year. Okay, because if he plays 16 or 17 games, we will then figure out what kind of quarterback he's going to be. Which category is he going to fall into? Is he going to elevate the talent around him to a point where the Colts are better than a solid football team? Or is he going to be propped up by Shane Steichen and these receivers? That's what I want to know. And I think early in the season, it's going to be really hard to tell which type of quarterback Anthony Richardson is. Because once again, he's walking into a good situation here in Indianapolis, which is a good thing. Okay, Shane Steichen does appear to be a good play caller. The Colts do seem to have some weapons this year, and the offensive line does seem like it should be solid again. And because of that, if Anthony Richardson has a lot of success early, people are going to be very quick to overrate him. They're going to look at him. They're going to be like, this dude just looks like a football player. He's 6'4", big arm, fast, all those different things, right, that we want from our quarterbacks. And they're going to look at him and they're going to look at the success. And they're going to be like, Anthony Richardson is the next guy. And that may be true. That might not be true. I'm just trying to warn you. People are going to be really quick to hop on this, on this Anthony Richardson bandwagon if he gets off to a good start. But, it's always better to show up to a party 15 minutes late than 15 minutes early, which is what I plan on doing this year. So by the end of the year, though, like once we hopefully see a full 16 or 17 game sample size, we should know whether or not Anthony Richardson is going to be the type of guy that elevates the players around him, or if he's the guy who's going to need to be propped up by a good receiving core and a good head coach, right? And my evidence for this is when we look at Mahomes, he walked into one of the best quarterback situations in the history of football with what was waiting for him in Kansas City. Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce, and Andy Reid. Those are, Travis Kelce is arguably the best tight end ever. Tyreek Hill has been arguably the best wide receiver in the league for the past, 5 or 6 years. And Andy Reid's one of the best offensive coaches we've ever seen. right? But it was plain as day throughout the course of that season watching Mahomes play that he could elevate an offense, right? He wasn't being propped up by Tyreek Hill, Andy Reid, and Travis Kelce. It was plain as day that Mahomes was a guy who could elevate an offense. And then Tyreek Hill left, and Travis Kelce got old, and Patrick Mahomes rose to the occasion. This season, we will hopefully find out whether or not Anthony Richardson is a quarterback who can elevate an offense, or if he's a guy who's going to have to be propped up and elevated by the things around him. Okay, he has all the talent in the world to be a guy that can elevate an offense, but does he process well? Does he make the right decision? Those are the things that are yet to be answered. Those are the questions that I'm going into the season wanting answers to. That, and can he stay healthy? That's obviously the most important thing. Before I take off here and I pass the mic to Dan Dockich, the great Dan Dockich, who was on from noon to 3. Joseph Newgarden won the Indy 500. Congrats to him. I didn't watch the race. Just full disclosure there. Didn't watch it. Didn't really care about it. Everybody that went told me that they had a great time. I said, that's good. What'd you do? And then they said, I don't remember. And I'm like, oh, okay. That's what I thought you were going to say. So if you went, I hope you had a good time. Congrats to Otter Creek. Dan gave him the driver, Joseph Newgarden. Therefore, Otter Creek gets to co-host an hour of the show with Dan and me, which should be a really good time. Looking forward to that. Looking forward to tomorrow. I have no idea what I'm going to talk about because the Pacers season is over and the Colts aren't playing and the Indy 500's over. We start to get into the nitty-gritty of it. I can't wait. Should be fun. I'll be back on the air tomorrow from 10 to noon talking about who knows what. Hopefully, you'll be able to tune in coming up here in about 5 minutes. It's the Dan Dockich Show. Make sure you stick around for that. It should be a fun one. The Dan Dockich Show coming up here in about 5 minutes. I'll talk to you tomorrow from 10 to noon. Thanks for listening.